Europeans and people from other foreign countries tend to shape their view on Americans based upon what they see on the news. As a result, it's not surprising that they think most of us are loud and overly expressive.
You just drop in and just smack the lip, whoop, drop down, snap, ah!
Unhealthy, and uninformed about the world beyond our borders.
Can you name a country on this map?
Asia or Africa?
That's a continent.
Oh.
While there's some truth to these assumptions, one perception seems to be growing in validity more than the rest. The idea that the average American is kind of getting dumber. In 2024, 54% of US adults had a literacy level below 6th grade, and the country ranks 36th in global literacy rates. Additionally, both the NAEP and the PIAAC, which measure literacy and numeracy skills, have shown not only a decrease in test scores, but also a widening gap between the high-performing and low-performing students. If you're an American like me, this should be deeply concerning. What's really behind this decline? Is it the education system, the rise of technology, a combination of several factors? Let's try to dive into every facet of America's literacy crisis, its consequences, and what we can do to combat this. The first place we can look to find answers is in America's education system. Our education system has changed a lot over the years, but the most important shift has probably been in the way we teach kids to read. For a long time before the 1970s, we taught kids to read through something called phonics. It involves matching the sounds of spoken English with individual letters or groups of letters. For example, a teacher will take a word like cat, separate the word into its 3 letters, pronounce a phoneme for each letter in turn, and blend the phonemes together to form a word. But starting around the 1970s, we primarily switched to something called the whole language approach. The idea behind this approach was that we learned language in a similar way to speaking, meaning children will pick it up naturally if they are exposed to rich language experiences. The whole language approach focuses on understanding the meaning of words within sentences and stories rather than breaking down words into phonetic sounds. At first, this approach seems intuitively correct, but it did not produce the results those who enacted this change had hoped. A paper titled The Literacy Decline in Instructional Practice by Dr. Virginia Bonomo cites a few studies to back this up. She says, quote, "In 1967, a review of reading methods was released and the findings were that the phonics approach produced better results in terms of the mechanical aspects of literacy and also in comprehension and fluency, which is the ultimate goal in teaching reading." Another report in 1985 published by the US Department of Education confirmed that classroom research shows that on the average, children who are taught phonics get off to a better start in learning to read than children who are not taught phonics. And we now have some recent data to back up these claims too. After Mississippi started using phonics to teach reading in 2013, its 4th grade reading scores jumped from 49th to 29th in the nation by 2022. But we can't attribute the decline in literacy rates solely to the methods used to teach reading. We have to take a look at the change in educational policies too. Later in this video, you're going to see how social media can really negatively affect your ability to improve your literacy and critical thinking skills. If you're someone who's really been struggling to stay off social media and invest in more intellectually stimulating hobbies like reading, having a personal coach might help you, and that is why I want to talk about today's sponsor, Strawberry.me. The coaching experience on Strawberry.me offers this really unique approach. Instead of you just talking about your feelings and past experiences like therapy usually does, they instead focus on present and future goals. I actually hopped on a session with Dean, who is one of their certified coaches, and was surprised at his ability to ask me questions that really helped me get to the root problems of some bad habits I've wanted to break. This approach is not about telling you what to do. It's about collaborating with you and empowering you to find your own solutions. And like I've said in a previous video, good coaches don't just feed you the answers. They give you the tools to find your own answers. If you are someone who's struggling with bad habits and you're looking for a complement to therapy, the practical coaching approach used at Strawberry.me will help you break free from these and reach your full potential. So if you want to work one-on-one with a certified coach, you can go to strawberry.me/Cole Hastings or click the first link in the description to start coaching with a $50 credit. Seriously, go check it out. You got nothing to lose and everything to gain. In 2002, the No Child Left Behind Act was signed into law by George Bush. It required annual testing in reading and math for students in grades 3 to 8 and high school. Schools were held accountable for student performance through adequate yearly progress, also known as AYP metrics, and penalties were imposed on schools that failed to meet progress goals. The main focus was to target low-income and minority students to close the achievement gaps. During the period the NCLB was enacted, scores in both math and reading increased, and phonics gained more traction in schools that followed the Reading First guidelines. But in 2015, NCLB was replaced with the Every Student Succeeds Act, which reduced federal control and gave states more flexibility in education policy. The nation's report card scores began to steadily decline, indicating that a decrease in accountability towards schools at a governmental level leads to worse literacy rates for children and teenagers in America. However, I'm not here to argue with you about which one's better or not, because both of them have flaws past just the nation's report card scores. Both the NCLB and ESSA focused heavily on standardized test taking, which led many schools to focus mostly on math and reading test prep. As a result, subjects like science, history, and the arts were often neglected, limiting students' broader academic growth. This whole test-centric approach may have boosted scores in the short term, but it didn't necessarily improve critical thinking or deeper literacy skills. It also meant most schools did not require any long reading, and instead focused on preparing the students to pass the annual tests by giving them short passages from books to memorize. You probably remember what it was like in school, only reading excerpts from books instead of the entire books themselves, and studying with the sole purpose to pass tests and get high scores rather than build your practical literacy skills. Unironically, this meme that has been blowing up on short-form platforms might be onto something.
If you would just get up and teach them instead of handing them a freaking packet, yo. There's kids in here who don't learn like that.
Bye.
They need to learn face to face.
Bye.
You're just getting mad because I'm pointing out the obvious and
No,
you're too
you're
late.
wasting my time.
But this test-centric approach isn't the only issue causing a disconnection between education and literacy. Both students and teachers aren't showing up to school as much nowadays either. The nation's report card found that higher percentages of students report missing more school monthly compared to previous years, going from 58% having never missed a day in the last month down to 44% in 2022. Why the strong decline? Well, the pandemic definitely sped things up. In fact, it really sped up the decline in literacy and numeracy rates too. Students started to feel less safe in school and got used to remote teaching, which led to an overall acceptance of taking absent days and studying from home when needed. We also can't forget the increased rates of depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues plaguing young generations right now, making them less likely to show up to school. But there's another factor many overlook: the increasing number of teacher absences. A May 2022 federal survey found that during the 2021-22 school year, chronic teacher absenteeism had increased in 72% of schools compared to pre-pandemic levels. In 37% of schools, absenteeism had risen significantly. Why? Well, again, pandemic burnout is the most cited reason. Teachers faced Zoom classrooms with disengaged students, hybrid schedules, and mask enforcement, all of which have driven stress and dissatisfaction to record highs. But blaming the pandemic alone would be short-sighted, because teaching was becoming a less desirable profession long before COVID. A paper titled The Rise and Fall of the Teaching Profession by Matthew Kraft and Melissa Arnold-Lyon argues that, across key dimensions like prestige, interest, preparation, and satisfaction, the profession is at or near its lowest point in 50 years, with a sharp decline beginning in 2010. The result? More teacher burnout, leading to a greater reliance on substitute teachers, who are becoming increasingly harder to find. That same 2022 federal survey reported that 60% of schools nationwide struggled to hire substitutes, and in 73% of schools, administrators had to step in to cover classes. Beyond staffing challenges, frequent substitutes disrupt learning. Think about how hype a day is when you have a substitute coming in. You're probably just watching a movie. But when this becomes the norm, students fall behind, especially in subjects like literacy, where consistency is key. This creates a dangerous feedback loop where burned out teachers take more absences, students lose motivation and skip school more often, learning gaps widen, making teaching even more frustrating, and teacher dissatisfaction grows, leading to even more absences. Clearly, something needs to change within the education system to give teachers more of an incentive to stay in the profession and reduce absenteeism, because this will have long-term consequences on literacy rates as these students grow up. But it's not just about improving how kids read or increasing their attendance, it's also about how much they read, and that seems to be shifting dramatically as well. Now, I was lucky enough to get into a pretty highly rated public high school in my area where I grew up, and we were required to take IB literature as part of the curriculum. If you're not familiar, the International Baccalaureate program is designed to develop critical thinking, research skills, and a global perspective through an intense 2-year course of study. And let me tell you, it was pretty damn hard. At the time, I wasn't exactly putting in my best effort, nor did I fully appreciate the value of this kind of education, but one thing was inescapable. In IB literature, we were forced to read entire books cover to cover. That's why I was shocked to learn that even Ivy League students, some of the brightest minds at the world's top universities, now struggle to read full books without finding it too overwhelming. And that, I believe, is deeply connected to a broader decline in literacy. The article making this claim is titled, "The Elite College Students Who Can't Read Books." It tells the story of Nicholas Dames, a literature humanities professor who, in recent years, has noticed his students becoming increasingly overwhelmed by reading. One anecdote describes a student admitting that, in her public high school, she was never required to read an entire book. This is followed by similar stories from other professors. But this claim is kind of shaky, which is why I wanted to examine it first. Rather than presenting concrete data, the author repeatedly cites other Atlantic articles filled with more anecdotes. Meanwhile, sources like the Associated Press suggest that there is little actual data on how many books are assigned in schools. If you are currently in high school, or you have been within the past 2 years, I'd love to hear if you were required to read full books to see if the Atlantic article's claims are true. So if you fall in that demographic, then leave a comment below. What is causing this decline in reading stamina? Legislation we explored, such as the No Child Left Behind Act and the Every Student Succeeds Act, which emphasize standard testing, could partially explain it. But even though these policies shape elementary and middle school curricula, which are critical years for literacy development, their enforcement in high school is far less strict. That alone doesn't explain why students aren't reading full books. What I really think it boils down to is 3 things which are caused by one thing. This thing, which is tied to just about every single issue I've talked about so far. The first major consequence of increased phone usage is the ease of cheating. If I had access to ChatGPT when I was in school, I would have been abusing that shit for every assignment. Back then, the best shortcut we had was SparkNotes, which didn't really provide great summaries, and the summaries had little detail. Now, students don't even need the literacy skills to read and comprehend an entire book or write an accompanying essay. AI can do it for them. The second consequence is how incredibly distracting phones are. If you were a kid and you had to choose between a dense, intellectually challenging book or a device that overstimulates you with endless entertainment, which one would you naturally gravitate toward? Phones make it effortless to get lost in mindless scrolling, and the constant dopamine hits make books feel slow and unengaging by comparison. Doug Lemoff, who trains teachers and whose book Reading Reconsidered aims to bring evidence-based reading practices into classrooms, put it well when he said, "Reading is an exercise in attention, and attention is increasingly fragmented." And third, phones are eroding our ability to focus on less stimulating activities for longer periods of time. People are reading far less than they used to, especially for fun. In 1984, 35% of 13-year-olds read for enjoyment. Today, that number has dropped to just 14%. Even adults are reading fewer books per year on average too. Like I explored in my last video, book sales are actually increasing, likely fueled by book talk, which romanticizes reading and makes book ownership an aesthetic. But even though more people are buying books, only a small subset are actually finishing them. On top of these recent technological developments, its prevalence has also given rise to a new form of literacy, online media literacy, which I believe is deeply connected to overall literacy. Let's face it, social media has definitely amplified some of the darker aspects of human psychology. Research shows that people are more likely to engage with content that emotionally triggers them, even if the way that content is packaged distorts the creator's actual message or lacks any scientific basis. I'm not completely innocent from doing this either, by the way, but as a result, a lot of people consume content at face value without taking the time to explore its deeper nuances. A common example highlighted by creators who analyze media literacy is how often viewers fail to read captions on short-form videos, even when those captions provide crucial context.
Apparently, a first dance with my father isn't enough. My dad just decided he's not gonna pay for my wedding anymore.
And all the comments were like, "Team Dad, this is so heartless that you'd cut off your parents in this way." And the caption of that first post said, "This is a Reddit story."
In some cases, people even ignore what was said in the video entirely, responding instead to their own assumptions or misinterpretations.
Hey guys, I love this amazing lip gloss I got from Fenty Beauty in the shade Hot Chocolate at Sephora for $21. What shade is that in? What brand is that?
The answers will be right in the post in the caption, and you will still have people asking you, what is this thing you're talking about?
I believe this issue has worsened as we spend less time reading longer texts. Deep reading, that is, engaging with a text critically, making connections and evaluating arguments, strengthens analytical thinking and helps us discern nuance. One might assume that kids and teenagers, having grown up with technology, are naturally better at navigating digital content. But even though they may be proficient in using technology, they often struggle with identifying truth in content or focusing long enough to pick up on small but crucial details. In many ways, the very tools that make information more accessible have made it harder to engage with it meaningfully. And I can only see this negative phenomenon growing the more that AI content becomes indistinguishable from reality. I really recommend reading this small paper on deep reading after this video because it explains how reading is unnatural to us and how it helps develop our brains. And maybe you can let it be your first longish read in a long time that isn't related to just reading a title and thumbnail. So now that we've covered just about every aspect of this growing issue of low literacy rates in the United States, I gotta tell you why this matters so much. Well, it turns out literacy is pretty fucking important for the future of this country. Low literacy rates contribute to widening inequities, correlating with higher unemployment, lower income, increased incarceration rates, and poorer health outcomes. According to the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy, children of parents with low literacy levels have a 72% chance of remaining at the lowest literacy levels as adults, perpetuating a cycle of poverty and illiteracy across generations. A Gallup study commissioned by the same foundation estimated that raising every American adult's literacy rate to a 6th grade level could add $2.2 trillion to the US economy annually. Beyond economic benefits, higher literacy rates also improves societal and personal well-being. A study by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development found that individuals with higher literacy levels are more likely to trust others, engage in politics, volunteer, and report better health. Improving literacy isn't just about reading, it's about creating opportunities, reducing inequality, and strengthening communities. The question then becomes, what do we do? I mean, shit, that's gotta be a long-winded answer based on everything we discovered, right? I suppose it starts with ensuring that our methods for teaching kids to read are as effective as possible. Some research suggests that there are better ways to enhance phonics instruction, and it's worth exploring these improvements further. Beyond that, schools need to take stronger steps to minimize distractions, which means enforcing stricter phone bans in classrooms and incorporating more long-form reading into curricula instead of relying on standardized test excerpts. Accountability is also crucial, both for teachers and students, to ensure consistent attendance while also providing more incentives for showing up. But we can't just stop at addressing burnout. We need to dig deeper into why burnout has become so widespread in a post-pandemic world. There are larger systemic forces at play, and understanding them is key to creating this change. We also need to completely reframe boredom, especially for younger generations who spend most of their time on social media. Encouraging them to embrace moments of stillness and rediscover the joy of reading a truly great book could hopefully have a lasting impact. That's something I actively try to promote on this channel, and I encourage you to do the same with your friends. Your reading stamina is like a muscle. You have to train it gradually. You start with lighter reps, shorter, simpler texts, before working your way up to denser, more challenging books. Over time, just like strength training or running, you will build the endurance to read for longer periods and engage with deeper material. So don't get discouraged if it feels too difficult or too boring at the start. it's supposed to be. Of course, this only scratches the surface on the issues we've discussed, so I would love to hear your solutions in the comments below. Let's start up some meaningful, deep discussions and spread awareness about these systemic issues that are holding our country back. My last video ties closely to this topic. It explores the importance of hobbies and how you spend your free time directly shapes your intelligence. So if that sounds interesting to you, then check it out by clicking right here. And now I'm going. Go read a book or something, man. I don't know.